Hello my friends, and welcome to The Secret History Living in Your Aquarium. I am back from a 20-day hiatus from the fish room. Now this time I put my faith into my tanks, and other than one tank that's in the living room, none of the tanks had any maintenance, any food, any water top-offs, or anything done to them. So it's been 20 days, almost 3 weeks. And I'm going to make it last 3 weeks. I'm not going to touch anything in here until tomorrow. So officially, yeah, this is about 3 weeks without any care. So I went down to Florida and got my lower implants done. And I'm waiting now. These are temporary teeth, and then I'll get the top ones done next. So as I was healing from that, I stayed down in Florida and had follow-up appointments. However, I want to show you guys what my tanks look like after 3 weeks of no food, no care, and what happens. So, do you lose fish? Which fish can't take it? Which ones can? That sort of thing out of the fish that I have and how my tanks are set up. Now, beyond all this, I want to mention that you can go back and see some of my other videos of when I returned from vacation. And you can see that I had some major problems with shrimp dying, with fish dying, algae, and mostly people overfeeding when I give them, very, very strict instructions on what to do. It's too much with all the tanks. So I'm going to go through some of my tanks right now, and I'm going to show you guys the highlights. Any tank that I don't show, just assume it's doing fine. You'll see it on a live stream soon. But let's take a look and see what's going on and where there are some issues with this whole ecosystem, living ecosystem planted tank system that I like to use. Be it filtered or unfiltered, all my tanks, save for one or two, are full of plants, full of micro nutrients and little organisms. So let's take a look right now and see how they all fared and see how they look when no one takes care of them. Alright, so right off the bat, I want to show you the worst of the worst, which is a tank that it was left on a mode where it had 10 hours of light a day on a FluVault 3.0. That's the green, default mode I have it on. And unfortunately, in this tank, it's definitely got cyanobacteria. Now, cyanobacteria is usually in your tank. Usually, it'll stay down low and in the substrate or on one or two surfaces, maybe near the filter where there's lots of aeration, or in a corner where there's none. They like these niche habitats. However, in this tank, the light and how close the light is to the top and the fact that everything was filled, it has evaporated a lot. Also, when I left, it was 38 degrees outside, and it got up into the 80s while I was gone. So it went from 29, or rather 15 or 10 as the high of in Celsius to 25 to 29 or even 30 as the high Celsius, and that warmed up the room. So we got a ton of evaporation, and I had hooked up my humidifier, and pardon the mess, I still have a giant mess from when I had the crisis right before I left on my trip in these two tanks. And had to move all my Africans over there, so I still need to totally redo the air lines, and these were the overflow buckets for the actual dehumidifier, which I used with a hose and overflow system. Now, it's nighttime, and so my Kuliloch is out right here, and you can see that, in the tanks with my samurai gouramis, they're doing well. My thread fins are doing well. My luminatus. These guys all had lots of scuds to eat from the scuddery, as I call it, where all my scuds live, up in the scud bank. They also had Daphnia and little tiny seed shrimp and other things like that, as well as some Malua shrimp, which are a Caridina shrimp variety that I like to just toss in every tank because they have so many babies, it becomes a food source for small fish. Now, up here, these tanks are looking a little rough also, just in that they've got a lot of claudifera or claudiphoria algae growing, and that needs to be removed. That means that the nutrients is probably building up. They probably could use a water change, but my guess is that the fact that the water level has evaporated so much and it's warm, also sunlight is coming in through these blinds slightly, it means that the nutrients that is in the tank, or the waste the fish are producing in the tank, is that much more concentrated in the small amount of water. So the wild bettas, they're looking happy and doing well. I saw the male just a minute ago. And my empire gudgeons, they're doing well. They actually, it caused a boom for the scuds. And so they actually have more food than ever, and they're looking fat and sassy, which is great. My wild betta machiensis, they're doing well. They had food also in the form of scuds and daphnia and seed shrimp. And again, you can see the ones I was really worried about, these guys, they've continued to grow and do really well, which is great. Now, another spot that I was a little worried about was my my shrimp in this one tank, because there's fish in with them. And not only are there the white cloud minnows, but there's also Elosoma, or the pygmy sunfish from the Gulf Coast area, these guys. And while I should probably worry about them in this tank as well, I wasn't as worried because they're very small fish in this little 2.5 gallon tank where I've put my tangerine tiger shrimp. And the tangerine tiger shrimp seem to be doing really, really well. Now this tank only has a buffer, and you can see there's about 6 of these fish in here, and they're all under an inch. But this only has Brightwell soil as a buffer, and that kept things very even keeled, kept the TDS down. Even though the water evaporated, this didn't have hardly any TDS as a tank. Now in this tank, there were scuds, there were planaria and little creatures in the bottom. In fact, yeah, I think there's some still in here. There's one right there that the fish could eat. So they're fine. They're doing fat and sassy, and a few shrimp are still around too. But I was worried that they would just wholesale get eaten by the fish when the fish got desperate. And I am here to report that did happen a little bit. I think I had about 15 or 20 cherry shrimp in here. In fact, here is the gal I think's responsible. See how big she is? She is way bigger than when I left her, and she's a little Elosoma as well, a Gulf Coast pygmy sunfish. But these guys, these white cloud minnows with the long fins, they're also probably able to take down a shrimp and eat it. Now, another thing that happened, this has evaporated a whole lot, and this is harder water. Remember, this was the African tank? Well, this filter clearly stopped while I was gone, and nobody was here to turn it back on. Also, as crazy as it sounds, the light stayed on. So, because of the water being so fresh, you can see how dirty the glass is and everything. There's hardly any plants in here. There's a floating lily, there's some kabamba, there's some hornwort, and there's a few stems of things that are really unhealthy. But other than that, there's not really much going on in here, and the heater must have stayed on and done its job. Aeration has been awful, but those fish that were dying and had to be put in here from the other tank, the Hoplochromis, Enigmatochromis, they're doing great. The little cuckoo catfish are doing great, and so are even my big chonkin Synodontis mustard cats. They're doing great. So I have some food sitting right here that I have set aside to feed them, and I bet they'll be pretty happy to eat. I'm going to give them a little food. I know I said I wasn't going to give anybody any food for 21 days, but I am curious how they'll react a little bit to food. And you can see they've digged up the substrate quite a bit. They've done a lot of digging. They flipped over their ornaments and stuff. And you can also see, though, that the Malaysian trumpet snail population is way down. And also the glass, even though it's got water stains on it and a bit of diatom algae on the inside, it's actually cleaner than when I left. So I think the fact that there's less fish in here and that this tank was empty and I had to move those fish into here and it was all fresh water, I think that basically there was enough surface area and mulm to keep it completely cycled and doing well. See, the fish are eating right now. And that it did just fine. My rice fish, I didn't have any worries there. I knew they'd do fine. I've even left them without food for 2 weeks and they're fine health-wise. So I knew they'd be fine also. Now, over by the window, yep, there's some algae growing a bit. It's Claudophora also. But my little rice fish, they're doing okay. And they're going to go outside any day now. So that'll be good for them. They'll be happy about that. Now, this tank, this is the only real loss. And this was a fry tank with some young Elosoma, or pygmy sunfish, and scuds. And there were scuds in here, and I don't even see scuds anymore. I was looking around when I first got home, and I didn't even see scuds. So I'm going to definitely test this tank and find out what happened. But again, there's no substrate in here. There's just some wool that was cycled already. Over here you can, I was going to say, you can see my apistos are doing fine. They are very low on water because they're closest to the window with the light as well and the heat from outside. So this room must have gotten pretty warm. In fact, everything has kind of overgrown in the tanks that I hadn't thoroughly cleaned out the floating plants from, the duckweed and so forth. And here you can see the crypts are even growing up out of this one. But all the shrimp in there and the handful of fish that are in there are fine. Now, this is another one of my, big project tanks. And this one, I turned the light off completely and relied on the lights across the room for what it would need. And the real issue with this tank that I'm seeing, other than it needs water and the filter's pretty full, is that the Rhamnocentris ornatus, these long skinny fish, they're a very quick fish that moves a lot, and I don't think they're really good at hunting scuds or shrimp or anything, and so they look fairly skinny. I came home seeing them fairly skinny, whereas these guys are still in spawning color. My gouramis are still in spawning color and doing great. So are the Chopridanios in here. I think they're probably over somewhere back in here on this side. And the other thing I have as an update that I want to show you, let me find her. I believe it's a little female. And there might be more than one. Oh, yeah, there's a Tinwini Danio too. Looking fine, looking like its belly's doing alright and everything. So this tank clearly had enough food. The CPDs, I knew they would be fine because they can eat microorganisms and things. Also, algae, not a problem this round. Remember last time I came back to just wads of it. Well, they're actually to the point where fish are eating the duckweed. And some of that time without really strong light really cleared off the filter spillway and some of the plants that were starting to get a bit ragged from all that. So I'm kind of happy to see that. The only thing I don't like is that these plants back here have melted because they did not get enough light and they put all their energy into the leaves up above here that are out of the tank. And while that helps them access all the oxygen in the room and CO2 in the room and all that jazz, when they die and they fall away like this, it's going to turn into carbon and it's going to turn into organic compounds that later could mean algae. Now, if it all gets water changes or is handled well or trimmed, then it won't be an issue. There will there won't be some crash. But that is something to let you know, that things like the melted red root floaters, we didn't have enough light to keep the red root floaters healthy in this tank. And you can see that the snails are kind of doing a lot of work. Also, look, we've got another little baby fish, and I don't think this one is a gourami. I'm not sure what kind this one is, but that labyrinth of plants has definitely made it so that all these fish, which come from heavily planted biotopes in the wild, are doing really, really well. And the baby gourami that I left in here, I knew of at least one. She's doing really well in that I saw her and she's grown a lot. So she's been eating all the little creatures that I find out in the yard, in my ponds, and that I inoculate my tanks with, for just this reason. Now, I'm gonna guess that these tanks are all fairly depleted of that microscopic, or it should be rather macroscopic life. It's mid-sized life I'm talking about. Baby shrimp, baby fish, all those things are what these fish could eat. And you can see the nanofish, they're really healthy. The gouramis are doing fine, because gouramis will eat algae a bit too when they're desperate. But the rhamnocentris are a little more picky, and so they probably didn't resort to that until they got fairly skinny. So that's one thing I'm a little worried about, and we'll have to talk about in another video how to deal with a lot of old, dead, and dying plant matter in your tank if you have a die-off like this, because it does need to be dealt with. Now, this tank, apart from the duckweed and everything, everybody's doing great in here. We've got the serpes and the phantom red tetras. We've also got some honey gouramis, or actually they're thick-lipped gouramis from Lake Inlay. And then we've got the purple tetras, which are blue. I know that doesn't make any sense, but just bear with me. Over here, you can see in the guppy tank, where I had a pair of guppies. They're doing fine. They're just chugging along doing their thing. And there's also shrimp in here. And the shrimp, as expected, as long as they have light energy to create, photosynthesis in the plants, the shrimp will reproduce. So the blue shrimp are still numerous, and they seem to be reproducing. I mean, I see babies and things like that too. So we're all good there. We're all good in even this 2.5 gallon tank that I was so worried about not pulling through. And we have buried females. Not only do we have buried females, we've got babies everywhere. So the algae has been cleaned spotlessly out of here, and the water level evaporated heavily. So in these 2.5 gallon tanks, you really have to watch out. Plus, this shop light was not on. This light was, and so it got indirect light plus the light from the sun in the window. And yeah, now I'm not going to turn the lights on because it's late night, but just to show you that my betta babies are doing good. They're all in there and accounted for. The 7 or 8 that were left, because a few of them just shot up ahead and outgrew all their siblings. But yeah, they're doing fine. The guppies are doing fine. In the kind of, I call this my rehab tank, because I have 2 bettas. One has a hurt tail that had an infection that I treated that in this tank. Then I moved the betta, and so it's just in a little less stressful situation as that tail heals. And then Lamias and live bears, they're doing fine in there. But I didn't expect anything there. Now with this, I'm going to have to hit it with erythromycin. That's what I'm going to have to do. I'm going to have to get some gram-positive, which is usually oxygen loving bacterias. And with a cyanobacteria like this, it actually oftentimes can produce a toxin. You can check out my video on that. And also, it is pretty harmful to the animals that need to live at the top, because it grows right on the top as a film. So while the little fish are okay, I think the bettas that were in here had a hard time because I think I lost my 2 bettas that were in here. 2 were in here, 2 were elsewhere. And also we have a really odd growth of something cottony here that is a little different than anything I've seen before. But we'll treat that with the erythromycin. So it looks like I lost a few baby elastomas. Looks like we just lost power. Oh boy. Alright guys, so the power just went out, and that is a problem that I had during my trip the entire time. I kept getting texts from my cable company saying your power's temporarily out. So it was out for 2 days, then it was out for 12 hours, another 15 hours. It's the 4th time it's been out in 20 days. But it came back on after about 12 hours or 14 hours here, and I'm going to resume showing you the rest of the tanks that are in the community room, in the family room, where my wife helped take care of the angelfish tank, but only that tank. The rest of the tanks were left alone. So let's go take a look at that. And yeah, what a freak thing with the power going out. And I'm sure I'll have to reprime a couple filters and things, and that's the kind of thing that can happen when you completely walk away from a fish room. But I wanted to do it honestly and just show you guys the results. So there they are, and here they come. Alright, so the only tank that actually got care was this one, and my wife did feed the angelfish, and quite frankly they're just too darn big not to be fed for 20 days. Now they might be able to last 20 days because the bigger the fish, the more fat reserves they have as well. And in this tank I trimmed all the plants before I left, and they've grown out again. So every week I usually trim this tank, but with the water low and the plants growing so quick, it's a tank that you at least have to add the food to it and make sure that the filter's going and all that. Now it's a very, very planted tank, and the immersed growth has gone quite crazy with that purple bamboo and the bulbitis and all that growing well out of here. But the algae stayed fairly well under control, and that's because this tank my wife took care of for the first half of while I was gone. She was here for 10 days, and then this tank was then alone for 10 days. So what she did is she had the light on its normal cycle during the first 10 days, and then while she left, she turned the light off, and we get lots of light through this window late in the day as summer comes around. Now, I'm going to be doing an update soon on this tank with the white clouds and the gold barbs, as well as ram's horn snails, malawa shrimp, and the deep substrate 5-gallon all-in-one filterless, because it's been 1 year and I feed it once a month at most. Sometimes I even forget to do that, and it is self-sustaining. But the fish that are in there and the shrimp that are in there, I had to work hard on that balance. So I'm going to do a whole video on a year update on that tank build. Now, the tank over here didn't get any special care or treatment. It was just at the whim of this tank's timer, and all the shrimp are doing super well. They're happy, healthy. The only thing that went on in here is something kind of similar to what happened in the other immersed tank, which is this Persicaria got leggy and didn't have enough light because I didn't leave the light on a cycle that was intense enough, and so the snails are starting to eat all of the lower debris, and sometimes that can cause enough detritus and mulm and just stuff building up that you'll get a snail boom, or you'll get maybe ammonia or nitrates building up. But if you've got enough plants that are still living and your snails are able to kind of keep up with that, I also have plecos in here. I have 3 snowball dwarf plecos and then some Cory, stir-by-Cory in here. So they do a pretty darn good job as the cleanup crew of vegetative stuff. They just don't seem to want to eat these big curly Q leaves. But other than that, I put a piece of zucchini in for the plecos since they haven't had any good veggies while I was gone, and I generally do fortify veggies and live foods in all of my tanks when I can. But you can see it again, the immersed growth is just insane. There's actually one that's come and grown out of the filter. It was just a little start of something when I left. So that's kind of interesting. Also, the red root floaters survived in this tank where everything's a little more compact and the twin star light is closer. But in this tank, the red root floaters and even the duckweed isn't doing so well. It's starting to melt. And so is some of this bulbitis. It's kind of dried out, kind of looking sickly. I'm guessing that's a lack of potassium and a lack of nitrates. But that's just something to watch in the long run. You can also see everyone's putting out lots of roots, which means they are trying to soak up more and more nutrients that just aren't there. And that's because I haven't been able to dose any of the potassium, the nitrates, or my micro or macro for that matter stuff. So that is why this tank is kind of in the shape it's in, and you'd also expect to see any day now these stem plants starting to get a lot more leggy, like this, where the lower part doesn't grow and is thick and the plant uses all its energy at the top. So to get things on course, we're definitely going to need to replenish Daphnia and scud and blackworm supplies in the tanks. We're going to want to take care of any of the rotten leaves and things that are in here. Now some can be left and that's fine, but you don't want it to just be overly intense with that stuff, or like I said, it can cause some runaway reactions. The little fish all did fine, and the angels did well. In fact, she looks like she may even have eggs again soon. So everybody did pretty darn good, except for the one betta tank with the cyanobacteria outbreak, which I just wasn't there to catch, honestly. But things like that happen at any given time. And then also the tank that had nothing in it other than yarn, which that's not too surprising that the 3 Elasoma Gulf pygmy sunfish that were in there didn't end up doing so hot and passed away, that were growing out in there. Now these plants have gotten so weak, this crypt albida, that I'm gonna have to definitely give it some nutrients as well. So I'll be dosing with fertilizers because everybody is very undernourished that way. But it's a balance, like I said, where we're going to have to take out things like this dying red root floater that didn't get enough light, this rotting bulbitis or dying bulbitis, and we're going to have to just clip and trim and take care of some of that. And that's where the work comes in, with removing these items from the system. See how leggy all of that got? Before it was nice and dense, and you didn't see any of the spotting that you see with undernourished plants. So although some of these leaves are absolutely fabulous, it's just, yeah. So that is the rundown, you guys, and wanted to just really thank you guys for tuning in and interested in the outcome of 20 days without any maintenance in any of my tanks other than this one. This is the result when you keep fish the way I do. So thanks for watching, guys. You know how to support the channel, and becoming a member is easy. It's only $1.99. It really helps me go on the trips like this Florida trip, produce content like this and the stuff you're going to see coming from Florida. And I can't thank you enough for all you members, all you viewers, all you subscribers. You guys, you make the magic happen around here. So thank you. And if you have any improvements or ways to prolong this self-sustaining tank philosophy, please put them down in the comments. I'd love to hear from you guys. Have a good one, and I'll see you next time.